friends, welcome to my channel. For those of you that are new here, my name is Caitlin. For those of you that are not new here, my face is happy that you are seeing it again. And today is our May palette rankings. So I say this every time, but for those of you that are new here, this might be your first time hearing it. I like to rank the palettes that I used during the month, not just new palettes, but also any old palettes that I reached for. I think it's a really good way to measure sort of like how much I actually like new palettes. Last month, for example, I think my top new palette was either in like the 11th or like 7th spot, which means like I had a bunch of old palettes that I liked better than even like the best new palette that I got. So I just feel like that really speaks to, you know, like, did I really like this palette? So anyways, that's the way I like to do it. I got this idea back in like January. I think I know for sure Karen Harris does this, and I think and still does it this way, her monthly rankings. I think Britt Clark had done it like once and then went back to just ranking like new palettes to her, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, I will link Karen's channel videos down below so that you can go check her out. I think her channel's amazing. I love the way she ranks the palettes, and I took her idea. So anyways, if you are interested in seeing the palettes that I used in May and hearing my thoughts on them, then go ahead and keep on watching. And before we get started, make sure to like this video. If you stayed around to say that you are still interested, make sure to give it a like. And then, you know, as we go along, comment any palettes that you use, or you could give me your favorite palette that you used in May, or if you got any of the new palettes that, like what you're liking, disliking, things you agree with, things you don't agree with, whatever you want to do, like feel free to interact with me down below. If you have been around for like my January, February, March, April videos, I either used more palettes than there were days in the month, or I used the exact number of palettes of days in the month. May is the first month I used 15 palettes, okay? So a lot of these palettes are new palettes that I used a whole bunch of times to like really get a feel for them. So that's why there's like a smaller number of palettes, but I was really excited. I was like, wow, I like really played around with the palettes this month. So anyways, in the number 15 spot, this is the Melt Vida palette. This palette came out in, I want to say 2019, maybe 2018. I can't remember. This was part of their Amor Eterno collection. It's basically, not basically, it is a 10 shadow palette with 2 shimmers and 8 mattes. The mattes in this palette are incredible. The shimmers are okay. And I don't love that the shimmers aren't like super light, so I always feel like I have to pull in another palette when I use this palette. I think the quality is really nice. I love the packaging. I love the color story, but those 2 shimmers just really like knock this palette down for me. In number 14, we have the Subculture palette. Now, Subculture came out forever ago. I actually never purchased it because of all the negative reviews until last year during quarantine, when there was like no makeup launching, and then Anastasia had like a sale, and I was like, okay, I'll buy Subculture now. So I believe I have the reformulated version. I still don't think the formula is like the best, but I also don't think this color story is like super set up for success. Like a lot of these colors like don't blend into each other well, just because of the nature of like a purple and a yellow aren't gonna blend together because of like color theory wise. I think the shimmers, they're kind of like a light like topper, almost like a duochrome topper, so they're not super pigmented. I really like them. I like this palette. I think it's fun to play around with, but yeah, it's just the mattes aren't the easiest. Like they require some finessing, and so that's why it is as low as it is. In the 13th spot, we have my Too Faced Pumpkin Spice palette. Smells delicious. I like this palette, but I don't love this palette. I mean, it's like pretty good quality. Like the mattes work really well. I think the shimmers are nice. They're not the best shimmers. They're a little bit on the chunky side, but I just think, I don't know, I feel like this is a good palette for me as far as like if I'm traveling or something and I want some options, but I'm also like not bringing one of my favorite palettes that if it got broken, I'd be devastated by. I think this palette is nice, but it's not like blowing my socks off or anything, but it is nice. And as far as like Too Faced goes, I normally don't like, I'm not even attracted to their palettes. I actually bought this palette on a whim. I was checking out at Ulta, and this was at the like counter like right next to the register, and I was like, okay, like I'll buy it. So yeah. In the 12th spot, we have the BH Cosmetics 80s Remix Dance Palette. I believe this was one of my new palettes for April. It's like a rainbow palette with some shimmers. I'm actually not a huge fan of like when palettes do where they have like one shimmer in each row and like that's it and the rest is all matte. I just don't love that. This palette definitely has, there's a dog hair on it. This palette definitely has really great mattes. They're super awesome quality. The shimmers are nice, but it's just like too many mattes for me, and I'd rather have like more shimmer options. Now, when you think of how this palette launched with like the 90s palette and the 2000s palette, I think it makes sense because those both had more shimmer, so you could, you know, kind of like mix and match them. But like as a standalone palette, I just wish it had more shimmers. In the number 11 spot, this is the Odin's Eye Erd palette. If you've been around, you know that I feel like I use this palette every month. I do the same look with this palette pretty much every time I use it. I like the way that look is. These shimmers are very chunky, so they do fall out everywhere. But overall, I think it's a nice palette as far as like getting like a really pretty like ethereal look out of it, which is what I tend to do. So yeah. In the number 10 spot, this is actually my Melt Cosmetics Beetlejuice collab palette. Oh, this is the recently deceased. They launched 2 palettes for that collection. But anyway, this is what this palette looks like. I really like this palette. I just wish that like Beetlejuice Draw a Door, like that there was like slightly more variation. I mean, one's lime and one's like a little bit more of like the color of like my dress, but like maybe a little bit more yellow. But I just feel like on the eye they look super similar. Same with like, at least with Bio Exorcist and Lost Souls, they kind of like blend each other out. But then like look at these 2 shimmers, like I don't know, I just feel like there could have been more variety in this palette, and then it would have been perfect. But I do really enjoy this palette. I think the quality is nice, and I actually think this is a really good palette from Melt as far as like their shimmer formula goes. Next up, in the number 9 spot, you probably just saw this video that I did reviewing this palette. This is the Serenity palette. It is a collab between Annette's Makeup Corner and Menagerie Cosmetics. This is what the inside of the palette looks like. I'm not going to get into it too much because I literally that's what is on my eyes right now because I just filmed my review of this palette. So I'll link that video if you want to I'll link that video in the description box if you want to go watch it. But overall, really nice palette. Mattes are great, shimmers are great. The reason it's not like number 1 or higher is just because it does stain pretty bad and the shimmers are a little bit chunky, but I still really enjoy the palette. I really like all the palettes from here on out. Like it was just, I had to be kind of nitpicky to sort of rank them. In the number 8 spot is the BH Cosmetics 90s Remix Dance palette. I like this color story a lot. I think the shimmers in this palette are stunning. I really like the matte shades, and then I like that you have even like this neutral option, or that you can blend them. As far as the 3 of them go, I think this might, like the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, I think this one might be my favorite, and I actually don't normally like pastels, but this palette is really nice, and it does pair really nicely with the 80s palette. If you wanted more depth, that 80s palette has the depth to like the pastel shadows. But overall, these shimmers in this palette are perfect. In the number 7, aka 7th place palette, is the Natasha Denona Zendo palette. This packaging is really gross. I'm so sorry. This is what, not that the packaging itself, I just meant because of all my fingerprints. Anyways, this palette is really nice. I haven't dove into like these 2 blue shades. I think those are the only shades I have left to use. But overall, I think the palette's really nice. I liked the quality of it. I didn't really have issues with the shimmers. I know some people did. I thought they were nice. I could see where like some comments that I saw in reviews were like that it wasn't as like special as like Natasha Denona shimmers are, and I could see that. They're more like shimmers and less like sparkly as her shimmers are, if that makes sense. Like Luster and I feel like Yama definitely have kind of that specialness to them, but like Flow, Equilibrium, Tranquil, or is actually a really nice shade on the eye. So I don't know. Anyway, I really like the palette. I didn't have any issues, but I can kind of see where, like, in comparison to other Natasha Denona palettes, it doesn't have quite as much oomph in those shimmers. In the 6th place spot, this is actually my Lime Crime Greatest Hits Bangers palette. This is what they did, where they like combined a bunch of the top shades from their Venus palettes. I really like this palette, especially for like kind of like just like warm like mauve-y looks. I think this palette is really nice. I really want to be a little bit more creative with it the next time I use it, because I feel like there's an opportunity to do like some really interesting color stories. But I mean, I really like this palette. In the 5th place spot, this is the Maryjane palette. This was my top palette from last month, but interestingly, I think it was in either the 11th or 7th place spot. I can't remember, honestly, but it was the top like new palette to my collection. Anyway, it jumped up a little bit this month. I think that is, I don't know if that's because like I had other palettes that I like more last month, or if this one's just like become closer to my heart as I've been using it. But I really like this palette. I like the topper shades, like Callie and Maryjane kind of function more like topper shades, but you can also get like a really nice smoky eye with this palette. And overall, I think the packaging is stunning, and yeah, I have really nothing bad to say about this palette. I know some people didn't like the, I believe it was like the shimmers that they weren't a huge fan of. I didn't have any issues with them. However, I do have another cool tone palette that I like a little bit more. So this is the 4th place palette. This is the Natasha Denona Glam palette. Yeah, I mean, this palette is just like, if I need to like get out of the house and throw something on, like this really is my palette. Like the Maryjane palette is nice to do that with, but this one is like my go-to, especially if I'm going, like I used this palette last month for like my anniversary dinner, and like this is that palette for me, where it's like I'm gonna go out to somewhere special and I want to make sure that my eyes look like nice and classic, and like this is the palette I'm gonna use for that. Now, I don't think I talked about, oh, the Serenity palette was, okay, I just realized I didn't mention which palettes were new to me in the month of May. The only ones that were new to me in the month of May so far were the Serenity palette, which was the 9th place palette, and then the Natasha Denona Zendo palette, which was the 7th place palette. Okay, so now we're getting into the rest of the rankings are all new palettes. So that tells me like I really liked the new palettes I purchased this month. So it was a good month of new palettes. Anyway, in the 3rd place spot is the Rococo palette from Musée Beauty. I think this palette is stunning. It is very similar to the Mercury Retrograde palette, but like slightly different like textures in some of the shades. But overall, I really enjoyed playing with this palette. I thought it was so fun. I liked all the looks I did with it. Yeah, I have nothing bad to say about this palette except I got mascara on it, so I'm cleaning it off. And the packaging is beautiful, so yeah, love it. In 2nd place is the Lois Cosmetics Meet Me in the Underworld palette. Again, beautiful packaging. I loved the concept for this palette, like just the Greek mythology story that she had picked. I love pinks and greens together, so I think this palette, and it just has like these beautiful grungy tones. Orpheus is by far the like shimmer that knocks this palette out of the park. The other shimmers are nice, but they're not like knock it out of the park nice. So I really like this palette, but I just think it's stunning. I love it all, and even though I say they're like not knock it out of the park nice, they're still like really good shimmers. They're not super chunky. They apply nicely to the eye. The number 1 palette is the last new palette. It is the Kaleidos Flower Punk palette, and I really like the outside packaging, so I'm keeping it in there. I use this palette so many times, but this is the palette, and then it has this like, and you can kind of see like this is one of the messiest palettes I have because I used it so much. I love this palette. I think the shimmers performed well. I think the mattes performed well. I didn't have any issues with blending or anything. I just think overall it's a super nice palette, and it's definitely my number 1. And I think Kaleidos is killing it because the Club Nebula palette was like my number 1, and every time I've used that palette, so each month and then Kaleidos has another new number 1 palette for me. So I think that overall in May, I feel like I did a good job. So I purchased 5 new palettes in the month of May, and I think I have a review video up on the Serenity palette. I did a video with the Zendo palette. I did a video with the Rococo palette. These were the two I didn't do videos with, but I posted IGTV videos with both of these palettes. But let me know down below if you want to see like an actual YouTube video with these palettes. I'm happy to do more looks with either one of them. Or if there's any palettes, I know I have like Maryjane and like the 90s and 80s BH Cosmetics palettes that are, well, they didn't come out in May, they came out in April, so they're still pretty new. So let me know if there's any palettes that you want to see some looks with. But yeah, that was everything from me today. If you haven't already, please make sure you subscribe, and also make sure to hit that like button and leave a comment down below, and I will see you next time. Bye!